GM. Welcome to Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. Don't get caught in the hype cycle. I'm Jay Bird, joined by my co-host Kyle Reedhead, and we believe that compressed NFTs are going to change the world. That's why we're carving a path for doers to confidently build and invest in Web3.
Jay, this was a great episode. Finally, we got to bring on someone from Solana and talk about everything going on there because they're doing so much. It's wild. And I feel like if you get caught up in your bubble, right, you kind of have these echo bubbles or echo chambers, we're going to call it, especially on Twitter, where maybe you got into one ecosystem and you kind of, you follow a bunch of people in that ecosystem, you miss what's happening elsewhere. And I think it's a problem a lot of people have, and it's why we start to get all this tribalism in the space. So we really, really wanted to get people out of the bubble and looking at what else is going on outside of mainly the Ethereum ecosystem, which we definitely cover a lot. And so this was awesome to have Nick on and just talk about, one, a little bit of comparisons and laying the land of Solana, but then talk about all the crazy innovations that are happening in the space. I mean, we're talking compressed NFTs where you can mint 1 million NFTs for under $100, which is absolutely unheard of. We're talking about Fire Dancer, which is where potentially Solana is moving from 60,000 transactions per second to 1.1 million, which is an absolute game changer for the on-chain world. And then just so many other things that are going on. This was a mind-blowing episode.
Yeah, Nick is just really such a great spokesperson for Solana to have on the show. He's developer advocate at the Solana Foundation, former U.S. Navy Marine veteran who transitioned his career, fascinating transition, to becoming this self-taught developer, and now really one of the leaders at documentation for Solana. So nobody better to be able to explain Solana's objectives, and really the role that Solana plays. We talk so much about Ethereum and Bitcoin being leading L1s, and we're very clear on the role that they play, but we don't talk enough about Solana. And I think this episode really will open a lot of people's eyes into paying a lot more attention to Solana. I know we at Web3 Academy are paying a lot of attention to Solana because we really believe that they play a role different than Ethereum. A lot of people think that they're a competitor to Ethereum. They play a different role, and an important role that really is going to be needed as we grow blockchain to the masses and achieve the mass adoption that we all see coming. And Nick talks a lot about the ways that Solana provides this service or this product that is so needed for the scale that we want to achieve in the future.
And I mean, Ethereum has done so much to innovate at the settlement layer, right? They've really focused on this, like becoming the settlement layer of the world kind of thing. And they've just consistently, created innovations and changes to improve Ethereum to be that. And so they've done so much research and focus there. What we really need to focus on now is the execution layer, right? The layer where the users are actually going to interact with. And that's in terms of getting costs low and making it scalable and fast and cheaper for people to build on. And just like all these UX improvements that we now need now that we have the settlement layers kind of figured out. And that's where Solana is just innovating on a level that just no one else in the space is. I mean, layer 2 is obviously our execution layer, so they are working on that, but Solana is just so far ahead of that world. And so only on Solana, or only possible in Solana, is their big saying. And we talk a lot about why that is and what that means for the space and what that means for different use cases that can happen on top of Solana.
So let's jump into learning all about what is only possible on Solana. Before we do, we'll just take a minute to hear from our sponsor. Modern newsletters are built on Paragraph. That's right. Paragraph is a brand new newsletter platform that combines the best parts of Web 2 and Web 3 to supercharge newsletters for both writers and readers. Build a community, not just an audience. Paragraph uses blockchain tech to allow readers to collect and own the words that matter to them. This takes reading a newsletter to the next level. With Paragraph, readers can mint, collect, and show off quotes from their favorite newsletters. This opens new possibilities like creators sharing revenue with fans. I also love their new feature, Paragraph AI. This integrates GPT-4 natively in Paragraph to create, edit, and improve your writing effortlessly with one click. And guess what? We at Web3 Academy are on board and have already moved our content over to Paragraph. We believe this is the future of newsletters because of the profound engagement it creates between creators and fans. So, whether you're a creator, writer, or an avid reader, it's time to check out Paragraph and capitalize on the opportunity of being early. GM, Nick, welcome to Web3 Academy. Great to have you today.
GM, I'm happy to be here. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. A little bit sad that I'm not at Breakpoint, Solana's big annual event. Nick, I can only imagine how you're feeling. You're not there, but tell us, what's the news coming out of Breakpoint so far? It starts, I guess, today. We're recording on Monday. This episode will air on Wednesday. Yeah. What are you hearing so far from Solana's biggest event, Breakpoint?
Yeah, it's the talk of the town, not only Amsterdam, where the conference is actually happening, but, the whole world's kind of talking about it in at least the Solana ecosystem. Companies and projects have already started to make announcements. We were just talking about Phantom, the popular Solana wallet, just announced a really big feature to be able to mint NFTs directly within your wallet, which, great thing to launch for an in-person conference. Makes a lot of sense. All sorts of, the agenda's been public for quite a while on the Solana website, and just the different talks and everything. I'm so sad that I'm not there. I'm wearing my Breakpoint hoodie from last year. I'm just so sad I'm not there. It's going to be great though. But it's all live streamed and I'm going to be watching it all week.
And before the show, Nick, you were saying that you think that this Breakpoint is actually bigger in terms of like audience size than last year, which is interesting because some of the, especially in the US anyway, some of the conferences that have gone on, like the permissionless one I was at earlier this year, was actually a lot smaller than the one last year. And so, that I figured was just to do with, regulation in the US and then obviously bear market. But it's good to see that Solana's Breakpoint is actually growing even during what has been a very tough year, let's say, for Solana. Well, not this year, but let's say the last 2 years or so has been pretty tough for Solana.
Yeah, it's been almost a year to date. It was a rough last year, but a lot of improvements have gone around in the ecosystem, the community, the network itself. But yeah, I don't have exact numbers. I haven't seen them yet, but I have heard internal conversations about more tickets have been sold, more people attending. And the thing that I think is really cool is that it's not just, Solana native people. There's actually quite a few people that are, I'll call them Ethereum native, but you've got like David from Bankless is going to be at Breakpoint. I'm pretty sure him and Austin Federa, who's at Solana Foundation, that we're going to record a podcast episode on stage, which is really cool. And then Rune from MakerDAO also going to Breakpoint. They're going to record a podcast episode. So it's not just for Solana people and Solana natives. It's, there's regulators going from various countries, including the US. It's going to be really great to see how everything pans out this year.
When I was at the permissionless conference, which again is not an ETH specific one or anything, it's all chains. But the interesting thing I noticed was how much we had people from the Solana world, the Cosmos world, and the Ethereum world all on stage together, talking about the problems that each chain's having, talking about how they're going to use like what Ethereum's using over here, what Cosmos is using here, and like working together to try to solve, the problems that we have in the space. And so it's great to see that that's the way that our conferences and just the industry as a whole are going. You might not get that if you're on Twitter, because obviously people have their bag bias and whatever. But at conferences, when people are actually doing the work, I'm seeing anyway that everyone's kind of coming together and trying to solve this stuff as a group, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, 100%. Like, not only me personally, like Solana Foundation, very similar mindset, but like me personally, like I love seeing, I'll call it chain cooperation. Like everyone's going to have some bias, sure. It's like choosing a tech stack. Like you choose a tech stack that works for whatever you're building, then you move on. But it's really great to see. There was recently Polygon Labs and Solana Foundation, these two chains that are, if you only see Twitter, they're very at odds with each other. But both of these organizations work together to put on an event in Washington, D.C. with regulators to both educate regulators and get educated by the regulators. And, we're going to do more of those. And that's chains cooperating together is the best thing that we can possibly have. I love to see it. It's good.
Yeah, it's exactly what we need. Okay, before we jump into everything Solana, I just want to give a chance, Nick, for you to just give a little bit about, just give us your, quick background on how you first fell down the Web3 rabbit hole and what you've been working on over the past few years.
Yeah, sure. So quick background on myself. I mined Bitcoin on a laptop back in the day. I was able to successfully mine some. I lost the laptop. I'm still sad about it. So that was like how I first discovered crypto. And I was like, this concept of Bitcoin and decentralized money has always fascinated me. I'm a self-taught developer. So I kind of like tinkered around a little bit with trying to understand the code. It was well beyond my years. I was either in middle school or high school in the US. So it was like young teenager kind of vibe. And After that, I actually went into the U.S. military. I just got out recently. I was in the submarine force for about 10 years, operating nuclear reactors and the propulsion plant for submarines, and then an advanced training simulator and things like that. And then after that, I kind of transitioned into this blockchain world. And I've been full-time in blockchain, working at the Solana Foundation for about 9 months now. I was part-time for a couple of months before, but I guess my core competency, my core mandate, I guess, is I maintain the Solana documentation. I'm one of the many people that do it, but that's like my primary job. So improve developer experience, documentation, help educate people, create educational content, have delightful conversations just like the one we're having now, workshops, that kind of stuff. That's kind of the background.
Very interesting and quite the transition. I did not know that. That's super cool. Okay, so before we get into, all the innovation happening around Solana, which is really why we want to have this conversation. There's so much going on there. To give a bit of context to the listener, can we talk a little bit about what's happened with Solana over the last 2 years? Because it's had a wild ride. And so people understand what's happened in terms of markets with it, but we're not going to talk about that. But from the perspective of being a part of Solana and going through this, we obviously had the amazing run of Solana in 2021. Then you had the collapse of FTX, which obviously was associated closely with Solana in 2022. And now in 2023, we've also had another amazing run of Solana, up like 200 and whatever % on the year, which is just incredible on a year like this. What the heck is going on? And what has this been like for you guys? Like, walk us through this sort of like pre-FTX, post-FTX, and just like what the vibes and everything's been like at Solana.
Sure. So I joined full-time after FTX. I had just joined part-time around the FTX timeframe, maybe a month or so before. In general, at the time, like vibes were good. We were gearing up for our Breakpoint conference last year. Everyone was super excited. The bear market was kind of, Terra Luna had just happened. Bear market was kind of settling in and people were realizing that. But everyone was still real excited to meet all their online friends in person. And then FTX implosion happened. Everyone kind of knows the fallout of that. The court case and whatnot is going on right now as we speak in New York City. And there's a whole bunch of podcasts that are talking about that. You guys just had Carly Riley on, who I'm a big fan of her. She was just on with you guys' podcast talking about that. But it really hasn't, it affected token price naturally, like everyone saw, but it hasn't affected any of the innovation that we have going on in the Solana ecosystem and on the chain itself. People have been constantly building. There's been a lot of really interesting tech that has been built. We've got our second validator client called FireDancer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. FireDancer is chugging along. That's making really amazing progress, and it's looking to be very, very promising for the ecosystem. We had, state compression. Compressed NFTs were a huge hit. There's been a lot of NFTs that have been minted because of it. It's a very interesting piece of technology. We've got the updated token program on Solana called Token 22 right now. It might go through a rebrand. It's kind of a bad name. We'll talk about that later, though. That's been going on. It has a lot of really interesting features like confidential transfers. You get some privacy baked in by default, which is really nice. There's a whole bunch of like interesting features and capabilities that it can have in the future. Kind of think of it like a modular extension sort of token program. So you can just add whatever extension you want and then add some custom functionality, which is really interesting from a lot of business use cases, I think. There's been tons of things going on. Visa decided that Visa's going to do a pilot program with Solana. There's, Shopify integration with Solana now. You can use Solana Pay and USDC to make purchases on Shopify, which is really great for creators in general. Like a lot of people have Shopify stores, so it's really great to see.
It's also Solana mobile phone.
Yeah, there's Solana mobile phone. I've got my Saga right here. I've got it. You can see on my shelf behind me, I've got my box for my development unit and my production unit.
Love that. What happened with Solana kind of reminds me of what happened with Ethereum back in the last bear market. There was a point where, everything like prices just fell off a cliff and a lot of people left this space and all the Bitcoiners were like, oh, Ethereum's dead. Like the whole community's dead, blah, blah. And somehow Ethereum rallied and the community came together. They kept building, they kept shipping, they kept innovating, and boom, they had that next bull market. And I remember what happened with FTX, I wrote a report about Solana and I was like, look, it's the same thing that's happening right now. Like, yeah, it looks bad market-wise. And of course, a lot of people are leaving the space just like they did in the last bear market. But let's see, can the Solana community rally? Can they continue to develop? Can they continue to innovate? And have they ever done that, right? And so all the kudos to the Solana community for just continuing to ship so many amazing things through that period of time. I guess any advice for what you saw, like how did you guys manage? And I know it's not you, it's more just, I think the community banded together, but like, how do you keep the vibes high? How do you keep everyone like on track when things are falling below their feet? Like, any advice there or anything you noticed?
I think the one thing is like Solana, at least like internally, and I think externally, like other ecosystems look at it and see, and Solana has just like a good vibe sort of ecosystem. We make it a point to, especially at Solana Foundation and Solana Labs, which are two separate entities, we both make it a point to, we don't dunk on other ecosystems. We don't do any like kind of trash talking kind of stuff. It's not productive for anybody, honestly. So, and the ecosystem as a whole kind of really banded together. Like a lot of people left, but everyone that stayed was here for the right reasons. They're here for the tech and like the capability that blockchain can have. And as like the next iteration of blockchain, so to speak, being able to have things that are faster and cheaper, like it unlocks a lot of use cases. Like we have a marketing term of only possible on Solana. You might have seen it around the internet. There's a bunch of billboards up in Amsterdam right now that they, but it's been, the community really, went through the trenches on this one with FTX and everything. And, everyone still somehow was able to keep good high spirits and then just keep building heads down. Like products are built in the bear market. So
I find as much as
to come eventually.
Yeah, as much as blockchain is supposed to be these decentralized technologies with these like communities all over the world, the leadership still really matters. And I think that's one of the things I've always said, like Ethereum did well. Vitalik was just a great leader, right? He's an amazing innovator. He, will communicate with everyone. He's not ever fighting with any other chains or has any of the bias and stuff. And Anatoly was the same thing, right? He's been just an incredible human throughout this entire bull run, bear run, everything. And he's just always continued to be curious and try to innovate and ask questions and try to like even support other groups. So, like, whereas you look at something like Terra Luna and look at what Do Kwon was like, right? It's just, he was an asshole and everything, then you see what happens. So it's like, I think it's a lot to do with leadership. I know people don't love that because they like to say, no, it's not about the leader. Like, it doesn't rely on one thing. People have always said that with Vitalik too, but I think it's a big, important aspect of any community and any ecosystem, no doubt.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I wouldn't use the word leadership because it kind of inherently applies like a centralization. I would say figureheads, like whoever are the figureheads, the notable people in any blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah.
People are largely going to mirror those individuals. Like Anatoly and Vitalik are perfect examples of this. Like they're both incredibly intelligent people. Most people, when you read their content, you're like, I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But they're both incredibly kind-hearted people, and you can tell just how they interact with people online. It's phenomenal that we have these types of people in the blockchain ecosystem as a whole. It's these types of personality are how blockchain is going to get mass adoption. Like without it, we're not going to make it.
100%. To get started, why don't we set a little bit of context just in terms of like trying to explain the differences of Solana versus something like Ethereum, or you don't have to explain the differences in terms of the technology of it. I mean, you can if you think you can do it in a simple way. But more like, and I'll try to give mine as well afterwards, but like I see that Ethereum and Solana each fit their own thing. They're trying to achieve something completely different. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are not quite getting. They think that they're fully in competition with each other, which I don't necessarily see it that way. Of course, a bit, but not fully. Would love to just get your high level overview of like, explain to me what you think the difference of, let's say, something like Solana and Ethereum and what they're trying to achieve.
I could definitely answer that question on Solana. I'm not as familiar with the Ethereum or any other blockchain ecosystem, but generally on Solana, the goal is, you might have seen the term of blockchain at NASDAQ speed. So it's being able to process transactions and data incredibly fast and incredibly cheap. And the reason for that is that if you can get everything incredibly fast, which means you can process a lot, you can have it be incredibly cheap, because at scale, when you're processing so many transactions, like every transaction has a small fee on every blockchain. And if you're processing, 4,000 transactions a second and you're paying a fraction of a penny per transaction, well, that adds up. Like validators can earn a meaningful income and to secure the network and participate like that. So that's like kind of the overarching goal. And I do agree with exactly what you said. Like they kind of solve different things. And I think much of Solana is just like Ethereum wouldn't exist without Bitcoin. Solana wouldn't exist without Ethereum. Someone had to go first. Someone had to give a first iteration. And naturally with technology, like someone's going to have a slightly different approach. It's a different tech stack. You're going to make different trade-offs, pros and cons to every single, design architectural decision that's made, and you go forward from there. And then I guess like one of our goals in the Solana ecosystem is composability, is making it so like you can write a single on-chain program that anyone can use. Like tokens are a perfect example of this, where on Ethereum, if you want to create like an ERC20, you want to create whatever, the next hot DeFi token, you want to create a personal brand token, whatever, you deploy a single contract that it basically contains your token, contains the holders and that kind of information. That's different on Solana. On Solana, the token program is actually maintained by Solana Labs. They have a new iteration that's out on mainnet. It's, finishing up auditing and stuff like that right now. But people don't have to deploy additional contracts and to have that cost. It's incredibly composable. So you can make a single request to this program and say, give me tokens. I want to create the next token. And you can just do it. So it smooths out a lot of those rough edges that I think Ethereum kind of does have.
The way that I sort of differentiate the two, which is, that's a great explanation, by the way, is for people to be able to paint a picture and make it easier. I almost see Solana as Apple. If you think of operating systems, you have Solana as the Apple, like iOS, and you have Ethereum as like Android, right? Ethereum has more focused on like building a platform for other people to then build technologies on. You think of like Android has like Google and Samsung and LG and whatever, all building phones on top of that operating system. And then you have Apple, which is like, it's just going to be Apple building on it, but we're going to focus on UX. And so we can build amazing apps. We can have developers to just build whatever apps they want. It's going to be super easy, whatever. I was going to say super cheap. It's not really super cheap on Apple. On Solana it is. And so like, that's kind of the way that I saw it, was like Ethereum's like, we're going to go fully decentralized, open source, like, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to use, but like you could build your own app chain and things like that on it, which is kind of your like Google, Samsung, etc. And then you have the iOS, which is like, hey, we're going to build it for UX and we're going to just focus on speed and, cheapness, etc. It's not perfect comparison by any means, but that's sort of the best way that I've seen it represented, that I think really gave me a good picture of what these two are sort of scaling for, or sort of optimizing for.
Yeah, I think some of those ideas I would agree with. Some of them I wouldn't. Like, okay, you have, like, Apple is inherently known for their closed ecosystem, which is definitely not the case on Solana. No, like everything is open source. But as in kind of like relating blockchains to phones, I in like phone operating systems, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's different tech trade-offs that you get, and you make those design decisions. The thing that I have heard from like the development side and like people trying to choose which chain is, and I think this sums it up incredibly well. I'm not an Ethereum developer, so take this with a grain of salt on that side, but a lot of people that have told me that have made programs and products on both chains, that the upfront cost on Solana is higher in terms of the knowledge and the technical ability that you need to kind of gain. And like the programming model on Solana is it's just different. Like a lot of the programs are written in the Rust programming language, which typically Web3 developers, they're just not familiar with. They're familiar with the JavaScript programming language, TypeScript, which is basically the same thing. Rust is just completely different than JavaScript. And so there's like a larger upfront knowledge cost that you have to there's like a knowledge hill that you have to climb over. But once you climb over that, you can build a lot more. Vice with Ethereum, the upfront knowledge cost is a lot lower. You can get something out a lot faster. You've got things like Open Zeppelin standard contracts, which are phenomenal, by the way. You have these standards and open source code that you can basically copy and paste, make your adjustments, and then push it to production. But you kind of hit different issues the further you get and the more complicated things you try to do. Solidity as a programming language just isn't that complex of a language, which is good and bad. Like I said, you can get up to speed faster, but the more complicated things you try to do, you do hit some different limitations. It's a design trade-off. Like you use for whatever case you're trying to build for, you choose a tech stack.
Right. Solana's more next gen, right? Like it's the next gen of technology, I would say, if you're comparing to what Ethereum would be on that. Last question on the infrastructure side, then we'll move to all the innovations and I think more to the app layer. But since we're still here on the infrastructure layer for now, the two things that you would hear, typically people, the naysayers of Solana, I would love to just address them right off the bat to get through this. One is value accrual, right? So a lot of people talk about how Ethereum is profitable in the sense of the way that it's making its fees and then bringing them back to ETH holders, where Solana's not quite there because it's too cheap. Like the fees are too small. The other one would be like decentralization. It's too expensive to run a validator on Solana versus something like Ethereum where you can do it from like a typical laptop. Can you just talk about those two things and sort of like how Solana sees those? I can add to it as well because I think both of those are not correct. But I would love to just get your opinion first on that.
The first one for like value accrual due to inflation, that's effectively what it is from my understanding. Like much like Solana, from my understanding at least, both with Solana and Ethereum, they burn some amount of the transaction fees that go on. So that helps with some of inflation. The thing to consider is that Ethereum is hands down a more mature ecosystem. It's been around for 5 or 10 years longer. So it's had a chance to, if you look at the inflation curve of both of these blockchains and like how those have taken effect, Ethereum is just further along in their inflation curve. Solana has an inflation curve. I know very little about it, I'll be honest. I don't pay attention to any of the financial aspects of it. DeFi is cool, but I just don't do it. I'm here for the tech. But so they both have inflation curves, and Solana is progressing through it. It's, the ability to change that can be handled via like consensus voting through the entire blockchain, which kind of segues into the next portion of your question of centralization, where both blockchains are incredibly decentralized. Solana has more than 2,000 plus distributed systems all around the world that are voting validators and non-voting validators to maintain the blockchain up. There's individuals around the world are running these. Individuals and companies are running them for whatever their desired reason is, whether they're trying to provide services to their customers or if they just want to run a validator to secure the network. There's a ton of them, so it's not centralized. And I think, people don't like to talk about the Solana outages, which we haven't had one in 8 or 9 months now. It's been good. The last one is a perfect anti-FUD case on that. Of people thought a common statement in the blockchain world was that Anatoly or Solana Labs had the ability to restart the chain, which if you look at the actions based off of that, that is clearly not the case.
No,
it took a massive effort of trying to coordinate at least 66% of the entire network of these voting validators to agree on how to restart the network, so that way consensus could continue. And so there's things like that, like the single validator client right now. We've got FireDancer coming up, and there's a bunch of efforts going into development efforts and infrastructure efforts to make it even better in the future. Like FireDancer is a perfect example of that. Like all these different decentralization and different aspects, like there's decentralization's a spectrum, and depending on which vertical of that spectrum you're trying to measure, it's going to change for every single blockchain. And Solana as a whole is raising decentralization continuously on every vertical within that spectrum.
Yeah, I would completely agree. It's funny. I was on a call a couple weeks ago. The guy ended up being he was talking about his company, but he ended up being a Bitcoin maxi. And he told me that Vitalik could turn off Ethereum anytime he wanted. It's like, dude, you're so lost. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I agree.
It's wild that people still think that these days, like of any blockchain for the most part.
Exactly.
I mean, like you kind of get in that with like sequencers or like kind of, touchy, but like Ethereum mainnet and Solana mainnet are Bitcoin is the exact same thing. It's like, there's no way that's not how it works.
Yeah. And then I think people just struggle to think like into the future. Like you said, with the value accrual stuff, it's like Solana is still very new. It has an inflation curve that will go down and eventually reaches something like 1%. The fees, obviously, it's going to start earning more and more revenue, we call it, as more and more people use it. And so like it will catch up and eventually it will become a sustainable like tokenomic structure. Like Ethereum just got there last year, right after the merge. So for 7 years of existence, it was not. And now you have all these Ethereum people be like, well, Solana's not profitable. And it's like, well, Ethereum wasn't for 6 years either. So like, give it some time, right? And then I think on the decentralization side, it's in terms of like the validator set, it's 2,000. So like it's growing, and it's been growing, I think, for a while now, which is great. But I think what Anatoly said too is like, sure, there's some like, it's a bit costly for hardware, but he's like, every year hardware goes down by like almost 50% in terms of cost. So he's like, in 10 years from now, it's going to be quite cheap, or however long. I don't know what time frame he gave, but like hardware just always gets cheaper and cheaper as technology improves. And so his bet is the hardware will continue to get cheaper, and that'll just make it more and more available for people to run validators for Solana, which makes complete sense. That's how most tech works, right? And so, yeah, again, people need to stop thinking about where we are right now or where we've been and think about, well, where is this going to go in the future? And that'll help to understand. Anyway, wanted to make sure we cleared that up because I know some listeners will be thinking that through. Jay, any other questions you have on this side of the...
No, I just want to add in, like, I think the one thing that a lot of people miss in this space, and this is true of all new tech, is taking a second to recognize the maturity of the business. And you said this, Nick, is, Solana just is not as old as Ethereum is. So we should not expect that it is at the same point. But being younger actually also gives it many benefits because it allows it the hindsight to say, oh, wow, here's what happened over here. Okay, we're going to do it differently because we're going to target different use cases. And so I just want to use that as sort of a launching pad into the next part where we're going to talk about the innovations that are happening on Solana, compressed NFTs, Fire Dancer.
Sure,
but I want to come back to this marketing campaign only on Solana. Nick, what are the things that are only possible on Solana?
Yeah, only possible on Solana. It's both a marketing term, but also very apt. So basically, it's this concept of if you think of any product you could possibly build, some of those products can really, like, you need internet for it, right? It's only possible with the internet. Makes sense. Some of those products absolutely make way more sense doing it on blockchain in general. Doesn't matter what chain you choose. Having things like true digital ownership, it's only possible on blockchain. Having digital ownership that is quote unquote backed by a central entity, whether it's, big tech company or, whatever your favorite gaming company is, it's not true digital ownership. It's a line item in their database. So only possible on blockchain makes sense for a lot of cases. And then because of how Solana works, both it being incredibly fast and incredibly cheap, there's some technology that kind of only makes sense on Solana. And one of those things is DePIN, so decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Helium, like we mentioned earlier, Helium's a great example of this. There's HiveMapper. And for those who don't know, Helium is a decentralized, it's the people's network of cellular signal. So it's decentralized people all around the world running basically really strong Wi-Fi routers. And they're helping to provide 5G service to anyone that wants to use the network. And that type of thing, like, it takes a lot of additional infrastructure and additional costs to do if you're thinking like, choose your favorite telco company, Verizon, AT&T, whatever. They spend a lot of money on getting cell signals and cell towers up all around the world in whatever areas that they support signal. Helium takes that, flips it on its head. It adds the blockchain aspect of it. It incentivizes people via blockchain technology. You get tokens, you participate in consensus, that sort of stuff. And you can run basically really, really strong Wi-Fi routers in your house to support this network. And so it subsidizes the cost of a big telco company trying to put up a bunch of towers, spending millions and millions of dollars to do so, just so they have their own service. That's one great example of this type of tech. Compressed NFT is also one of those things where typically on Solana, so if you think about like minting NFTs on Ethereum, like I mentioned earlier, you have to deploy a new smart contract. That smart contract controls your NFT collection, and it's immutable once you deploy it. You can do wrapper contracts and that kind of stuff, but effectively it's immutable by default. Then on Solana, so you have to pay for that. On Ethereum, you have to pay for that cost to deploy that transaction or that contract. It's going to vary based off whatever gas price is at the time. It's pretty variable. It can cost less or it can cost more, right? On Solana, we recently had this really big push for compressed NFTs using this technology called state compression. And it basically makes it so a normal NFT on Solana would cost 0.024 Sol, which, yes, I know that off the top of my head. Vice now, with compressed NFTs on Solana, you can mint a single compressed NFT for a single transaction cost. So you can take it on the scale of, and there's a whole bunch of variables that go into this. I will shill my personal project tool called compress.app. You can kind of go to it and you can tinker around with how the cost differs, but you can mint something like 100 million compressed NFTs for 100 Sol, which is wild. On the inverse, to mint 100 million non-compressed NFTs, traditional NFTs, as I like to call them, would cost hundreds of thousands of Sol. So it's an astronomical cost reduction, due in large part because of the technology that backs Solana and how Solana works and how it's able to process transactions so incredibly fast. And these two technologies are some of my favorite, especially compressed NFT. I did a lot of the documentation work for compressed NFTs when the large push, actually right when I joined Foundation. I'm very bullish on compressed NFTs.
Yeah, I think the big thing of the only on Solana is anyone that, or any use case that requires a lot of transactions, right? Or transactions or minting, that gets very expensive. Of course, on Ethereum, we're talking dollars to tens of dollars, sometimes hundreds of dollars. And then even on Ethereum L2s, which is more what I see as the competitor to Solana, is not Ethereum. You would never try to do 1 million NFTs on Ethereum, but you might on an L2, but even those are costing pennies. Whereas what you're talking about on Solana, especially with compressed NFTs, we're talking fractions of pennies to mint and transact with these things, whether that's talking about Helium or you're talking about compressed NFTs or many of the other things. So I think it's when whatever use case, it basically makes the cost of doing it on blockchain almost zero, right? Like it's basically zero until you're getting to
zero to the user, which is, I think, the important
exactly. Yes. That's exactly it. Zero to the user.
To the consumer, I'll say.
Yeah, it now makes it an expense that I think the company or the application or whatever it is that you're creating just covers, and the user never has to think about it, which I think is a massive unlock to the space. Because I think gas fees is probably those, other than bridging, gas fees is like one of the worst UXs of Web3 for sure.
Yeah. And the thing that compressed NFTs really unlocks is if you think of any application, any typical Web2 application that you've used, like a lot of them are free for various reasons. It's free to the consumer. You're spending time on the platform, you're watching ads in a lot of cases, but you're not paying, for the most part, you're not paying for these applications you're using with your immediate direct dollars. And compressed NFTs is kind of that, where it allows businesses to like reasonably subsidize the cost for their users. Like you as a business, as a product owner, you can absorb the cost of minting 100 million NFTs for such a low cost relative to if your users had to pay that, where it's like it unlocks so many interesting use cases of, you can do a mass NFT airdrop. Like drip.house is my favorite example of this. Like last quarter, they minted like 45 million compressed NFTs. And like, that is just wild. And
crazy.
They can do this and they don't charge any of their users at all. People can make donations to artists. It's a free NFTs for anyone who signs up kind of thing. And you just collect this interesting, really cool art. It's one of my favorite things on Solana, actually. They don't charge users at all because the cost is so low that they can absorb that cost and still continue smartly. And that's one of the things that compressed NFTs really unlocks. It allows businesses to subsidize their costs and have reasonable costs to do so.
Right. It's like most businesses don't charge the end user for the cost to run their server or to run cloud or whatever. And so it's the same idea. And then I just want to clarify to people too, like Reddit, for example, which uses Polygon, they cover the costs for the users there, which there's about 20 million or so that have been minted for the Reddit NFTs. But that still costs Reddit like hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. What we're talking about Solana is orders of magnitude cheaper. Like what Reddit did that they paid hundreds of thousands over on Polygon would cost maybe $100 on Solana with these compression NFTs. So like, I just want people to understand how big of a step forward this is for blockchain technology. It's a massive difference than anything else that exists other than, I don't know, maybe some of the newer like Sui or some of these other blockchains, but honestly, I don't know much about them. So it's hard for me to say like,
I don't either.
What they're doing. Yeah. I don't think they have anyone that's doing millions on it anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no idea. To shout out to Drip House again, like not affiliated at all, just a really big fan of them. The founder's awesome. The founder, Vibhu, he made a post on Twitter right after they switched to using traditional NFTs to compressed NFTs. And he's very public about a lot of the data points that they have and how many NFTs they mint and a lot of this types of analytics. And he had a post that said something to the effect of, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it's like orders of magnitude different, where it's like him and his company were spending $10,000 a month to mint these NFTs and give them away for free. And then when they switched to compressed NFTs, it was on the fraction of $100 to $1,000 a month. And that was as they had almost exponential growth in their user base as well. So
just in time, they made the switch.
Exactly. It was like perfect timing for them, which was one of the reasons why we were really pushing for everything getting out when it did.
Well, and I think that one of the things that this really fits the narrative of the next wave of adoption that is coming. And we've talked a lot about this at Web3 Academy is this. We couldn't have had Friend Tech in the last wave, in the last bull run, because there wasn't, and Friend Tech, it's on Base, it's not on Solana. But the point that I'm making is we couldn't have had this potential to offer scalable apps for new use cases. And the thing that I think most people don't see right now, and I love this marketing campaign only on Solana, but I also actually really love the term only on blockchain as well.
That's good.
It's not just Solana, it's just only on blockchain. We always say on-chain is better than online, but I almost like the only on blockchain because I think people are missing the forest through the trees right now. And we're partly to blame for this because people still see NFTs as JPEGs. That's case in point. I think a lot of people are missing what is coming in the future is, okay, our identity moves on chain. Our entire social graph moves on chain. Our cars move on chain. You saw we had California who now does deeds of your car's ownership on chain. These things can't happen at scale if we don't have the tech that enables that. And we have not had that up until now. And so it's almost like I feel like we're in that position where it's like, you don't know what you don't know. It's like when you walk into a sci-fi movie and they're going to tell you something you've never even, aliens you've never even thought of before. Like that's where we're at. There is use cases coming that we don't even know yet because we
100%.
weren't able to do it before.
Yeah, I just wrote our last pro report. Did it go out this week or last week? I can't remember. I think it was last week. And I was like, everything that you know about NFTs from the 2021 days, forget about it, because now that we have compression NFTs, the whole game has changed, which leads me to the question, Nick, what are you guys thinking is the next use cases that happen now that we can have NFTs for fractions of pennies? Like, is there anything you're seeing maybe that isn't live yet, isn't launched yet, but you guys are talking about, we're like, oh, this is now possible online or on Solana?
I mean, off the top of my head, like nothing, like I haven't personally seen any like internal or external conversations that are like specific enough to like target and pinpoint. I think like off the cuff of my brain, I guess, I think putting things like having just like general on-chain data where it's like you can put additional data on chain, because I'm sure both of you know, and I'm sure some of your audience knows, like an NFT is not a JPEG. A JPEG can be an NFT, but an NFT is not always a JPEG. An NFT is provable, ownable block space on the blockchain. It can be whatever the creator wants it to be. So with that, with compressed NFTs, with it being such a low cost, you can put anything you want on chain. You can have it cryptographically verified. You can have it go through all of the, wonderful technology that is blockchain, goes through consensus and, gets verified as a truly authentic. You get, your stamp of certificate of authenticity. That's how I like to think of it, NFTs. And you can put whatever data you want on chain. And I've heard some people talking about trying to do, they've called them like Web3 cookies. I don't really like the term because people generally try to stay away from cookies, especially if you're in Europe, GDPR and all. Basically, the concept is that if you can put any data on chain, if a user was incentivized to put their personal data on chain, provided that it's private is the only way that I think this works, private, and like you get into like zero knowledge proofs kind of stuff, where it's like the user can choose what data they're going to put on chain. Like me as a person, I can say that, I am above the age of 21 years old. You don't need to know how old I am, but you just need to know, like, that's basically the only cutoff of like in the US, like, are you legally allowed to drink? If you're over 21, yes. If you're not, no. Things like that. You can have social information is super easy. Like, I think the fan bases of like Spotify, of like Taylor Swift, for example. Are you a Taylor Swift fan? Like, you can put that information on chain and have it cost effective, where you can have, once you have enough of this bulk data on chain that's kind of just generic user data, I'll call it, that you can offer so many interesting experiences to users and customers that has really never been the case before. Right now, that data all exists, but it's in centralized databases that go behind gatekeepers, and it's not publicly accessible. Maybe you have to get some data from Spotify, some from Netflix, some from YouTube. But if all that data was on chain, from the business use case, like, imagine all the things that you could provide your customers if you're running a business, if you built a product, if you had all this random bits of data that you could effectively privately data mine. People don't like the term data mine. That's what it is. If you can privately sift through this data to provide a good user experience because the user has opted to publish that data, that is incredibly powerful. And I think that's going to be the next wave that's going to spur some really interesting things on blockchain.
Yeah. Your answer is basically anything can go on chain when you have compressed NFTs, right? And data, whatever you want. When we think about the V1 of NFTs, like most of the JPEG was not actually on chain because it was too expensive. Yep. Most of the metadata was off chain because it was way too expensive. And now basically anything can go on chain and it's cost effective, which is super cool.
Yeah. I think as well that we talk a lot about Twitter and Elon Musk, thinking, could he bring Twitter on chain? And that hasn't been possible, but it might be possible in the future. And you know what? We need it because of AI and bots that are producing crazy amounts of fake content. And we all know that on-chain is the solution. Verified identity is the solution to that. Like, these are the type of use cases that are so big, and they're not going to happen tomorrow. It's not a simple business. It's going to require a lot of effort and a lot of people behind it. But I think we can get there. And yes, Solana, only on Solana, might take us there in the future.
This is a great transition into FireDancer. Many people are like, okay, FireDancer, you guys keep saying that. What does that really mean? But the reason why this is a great transition is there's a few numbers that I've heard recently in talking about Twitter, which is, okay, so first, Solana, I believe, is max throughput would be like 60,000 transactions per second, as far as I know. I don't think you guys have ever done that, but like,
I think that's like
60,000?
Theoretical,
yeah, exactly.
Theoretical possible, I think, yeah.
So, and we'll dive into the details on this, and so Twitter, for example, if Twitter was to move on chain, I think it's 25,000 transactions per second it would require, is what I saw from a report elsewhere. So it would basically take up half of all of the block space of Solana, which of course, that doesn't make any sense, right? Sui, which I think is like another, supposedly super fast chain. Again, it's never gotten this high, but I think is up to like 100 or 120,000 transaction per second. Again, they've never actually happened, so we don't know this exists. It's theoretical. But with FireDancer, this new client, and we'll talk about what all this means in just a second, the theoretical throughput here of what this could do for Solana is potentially moving it from 60,000 transactions per second to 600,000 to 1.1 million transactions per second is basically what they've theorized from this. Now, can it happen? We don't know. It's not live yet, but that's potentially what can happen. And when that happens, because think about it, when you have compressed NFTs, you're going to have so many transactions, but even Solana can't handle all those transactions. If something like Twitter plus Instagram comes on here, plus the whole finance world comes on, well, we need more throughput. And so with FireDancer, you have Solana potentially moving to 1.1 million. And this is actually happening maybe by next year, we've been told. So walk us through a little bit of this. What the heck is FireDancer? And give us as much details as you can without going too far into the weeds so that we can kind of all get our heads around what this means.
So let me set the stage a little bit. So when you think of blockchain, any blockchain that is a proof of stake blockchain, so Ethereum is proof of stake now, Solana is proof of stake, Bitcoin, proof of work. A proof of stake blockchain requires a validator. Ideally, you have a bunch of validators that all work together. And basically, these validators are they're running the blockchain's code, the actual like client, so to speak. They're running the blockchain code and they're ingesting all of the data that is coming in. So every single transaction that you send to the blockchain, the validators get that data and they process it. They do things like, general data integrity checks, security checks, like, did your account actually sign this? Did your wallet actually sign this transaction? Things like that. They, check if they can deduct transaction fees and so on and so forth. A lot of that's pretty like intensive work. If you think about, especially at the scale that Solana has right now, Solana averages about 3,000 to 4,000 transactions a second, like actively on mainnet right now. And that, swings a little bit either way at any given time, but on average about 3,000 to 4,000. Theoretically should be able to get up to like 60,000-ish, but that's basically not doing any of the security checks, data integrity checks, because as you add these types of things, you're inherently going to slow down the computation effectively. So right now, Solana only has one client. It's maintained and written by Solana Labs, the organization. Anatoly is I believe he's the CEO of Solana Labs. I think is his title. But he's at Solana Labs. They maintain the Solana Labs client. Where FireDancer is a completely new client written in a completely new programming language. And it's written to be incredibly fast, much faster. Like you said, like theoretically can get about 1.1 million transactions per second, which is astronomical. And I think they have actually achieved that in their testing. But again, I think they're not doing a lot of those like data integrity checks, security checks, things like that. I could be wrong, but that's my suspicion. But either way, like having a second validator client, think of it as at the bare minimum, a perfect form of redundancy. So if you have two different pieces of software written by two completely different technical teams, written in two completely different programming languages, and they're both running at the same time and able to maintain a blockchain, that's incredibly powerful. That makes it so if one of these blockchain clients, one of these Solana clients, has a security bug or some sort of bug, like a processing bug or any type of software issue, any sort of software bug, you can just switch over to the other one and the blockchain keeps going, no problem. Especially with them being written by two different teams in two different programming languages, that is incredibly powerful. And to my knowledge, Ethereum is the only other blockchain that has this. So that is one of the aspects that, like I mentioned, the verticals of decentralization on that spectrum, having multiple clients written in multiple programming languages is one of those things that Solana is getting really close to having and will be the second blockchain to have it, second only to Ethereum.
Yeah, I think Ethereum has 4 or 6. I can't remember how many clients, but it's been integral to keep Ethereum running, right? Like we talked about at the beginning of, Solana went down a few times. If Solana had these other clients, which it's about to, you don't have this downtime ever when you have, basically ever when you have that. I mean, Ethereum has had clients go down, but because they had multiple clients, Ethereum itself never went down. But it took Ethereum a little while to get to 4 or 6, whatever it's at now. Yeah, it takes time. It's not an easy thing to do. So Solana, same thing. Still only a few years old, and now it's about to have its second, which is huge.
Yeah, and I'll give a shameless plug for Breakpoint again. In fact, there's going to be a really large Breakpoint or a Firedancer announcement at Breakpoint. You can find the videos online. I'm sure there'll be clips and they're streamed live on the Solana Foundation's YouTube. There's going to be a really big Firedancer announcement. And like Firedancer is progressing incredibly well. And the other thing is that, and this was unbeknownst to a lot of people for a really long time, there's actually a third client in the works. There was I'm trying to remember the company. There's a third client in a third programming language that I think it's Syndica Capital. They just decided that they were going to build a third client. Like they had, from my understanding, they had almost no interaction with Solana Labs or Solana Foundation, and they just announced it that they were working on it. So now there's a third client that is also in the works in a third programming language by a third company. So that's, incredibly bullish.
It's amazing to see what happens when you start to build an ecosystem and you have others that want to build on top of that. I was just checking, Ethereum has 7 clients, I believe, currently, just to get that number in there.
Does that include, out of curiosity, because like I said, I'm not very familiar with the Ethereum ecosystem, is that like mainnet validator clients or is that light clients? Because light clients can't, from my understanding, light clients can't actually send transactions. They can only verify data. So it doesn't really, I personally don't think that kind of counts. So does your data point have that difference?
I don't know. I just
look it up.
Quick Google search gave me 7 clients, but doesn't give me the exact details on each. I think we're getting
technical.
Get into the tech weeds that goes beyond.
I'm a nerd. I like to nerd out.
Okay, so when does Firedancer launch? Is there a launch date?
There's no launch date. It's an ongoing project. They started, I want to say a year and a half ago-ish. They're making really good progress. I'll just say, check out the announcement.
Which is probably out for most people by the time you're listening to this, because I think the announcement's going to be Tuesday or Wednesday, and now you're listening to this, it's on at least Wednesday, so it might already be out.
Okay, 2 more things I want to cover quickly before we wrap here that have been exciting and happening in the ecosystem. I want to talk a little bit about the Solana token program. You mentioned it at the start of the show, Nick. Can you tell us a little bit about the new Solana token program? What is it? What does it enable? What are the exciting features?
Yeah, sure. So it's called Token 22, unfortunately. It was originally started being built in 2022, and now it's 2023 and almost 2024, which is actually the name of the developer's talk at Breakpoint, which I think is phenomenal. But the new token program on Solana, it's built by Solana Labs, maintained by Solana Labs. It's the next generation of the token program. So same sort of thing. You can create tokens for whatever your use case is. Tokens on NFT on Solana are also how NFTs work. Every single NFT is a token from the token program, not including compressed NFTs, but traditional NFTs are. And this new token program is super interesting because it has this modular nature where it has this concept of extensions. So there's a bunch of extensions that Solana Labs has developed already. And basically think of it like, a browser extension. You install this, you run this additional piece of code that can be written by anybody, and it adds extra functionality to your browser. Take that same idea and put it on tokens, and you can add additional functionality within like how tokens are handled within your particular tokens. So right now, to my knowledge, there is a couple of them. One of them is a metadata extension. So you can basically automatically assign metadata to a token, like natively within the token program. In the past in Solana, it's basically you had to have like 3 different programs to kind of do this, but now it's baked into one. So it's just like an efficiency thing. You can have non-transferable assets. So people are pretty knowledgeable on soulbound tokens, SOUL. And soulbound tokens are just, you can't, I like to specify.
Yeah, it's actually
soulbound tokens they're non-transferable. So you get them minted to your address and you can't do anything with them. That's good and bad. It's bad because if someone sends you a token that you don't want, it's stuck in your wallet. So someone could send you something that you find very offensive or, has personal information that you don't want public, and there's nothing you can do about that. That's a design flaw, I think. And the plus side is like you can have true identity. Like you can have your identity in a token. You can choose which information you display publicly. And you can have like that proof that you can't transfer it to the original person, whoever minted it. The new token program has this built in with it, but with the added benefit of you can always burn the token. So once you mint a non-transferable token, it is stuck there until you burn it. So you can't transfer it at all, but you can always burn it to get rid of it, which is definitely a like design and security benefit. And then my personal favorite is confidential transfers. This one is really cool. So most blockchains inherently public information, public data. Some exceptions. You got like, I think Zcash is like that. I know Monero is where things are private by default and confidential by default. The new token program has a confidential transfer extension, which uses a bunch of cryptography and zero knowledge proof kind of stuff. It makes it so you can send people tokens without revealing your address or without revealing the balance that you're sending. So I could send one of you 5 USDC and only the 2 of us would know that I sent you 5 USDC. The rest of the blockchain just sees that we had a transaction together and that's it. So you get confidential transfers by default. And now to be clear, to clarify, there's a difference between private transfers and confidential transfers. Private transfers would be something like using on Solana, you have like Light Protocol and Elusive where you can have, it's private on both ends. You don't know the sender, you don't know the receiver, and you don't know the balance. Confidential transfers are, the sender and receiver, but not the balance. That's super interesting, especially when you take it from the perspective of businesses and products that want to, transact more on chain. Maybe you're, choose your favorite coffee shop and you want to send them money to buy your coffee. Well, maybe the coffee shop, small business owner, they don't want to share with the world their personal finances. And that's absolutely, their right, or it should be their right. Things like confidential transfers make it so we can have this type of privacy, and it's phenomenal. I love to see it.
It's incredible, all the innovations that are coming out of Solana. What a great time. Exciting time to have Breakpoint. So many things coming. Also really exciting to see the price doing so well as it is right now. I know we didn't talk about price in this show, and that's not the focus, but everything, I'm very bullish on Solana. Everything is going so well. It's so great to see. Nick, before we jump into a speed round, I just want to give you a chance to give a little bit of a personal shill. I know you have your own podcast. Tell our listeners where they can learn more about Solana for those that want to keep up to date.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it. Like you said, I have a personal podcast. I do it in my own free time. It's called Sulfate, SOLFATE. It's actually a pun for sulfate, like SULFATE, the chemical compound. It's made out of glass. It's one of the components of glass. And one of the common jokes in the Solana ecosystem is it's like chewing glass. So it's actually a science pun in there. No one gets that though, unfortunately. But I digress. It's a Solana themed podcast, but me and my co-host, we talk with founders and builders in the Solana ecosystem. Some of them are developers, some of them are not. And we just talk interesting tech of what's going on and people's mentality. We've had some of the biggest people in the Solana space on. We're going to have Anatoly himself on in a couple of weeks. After Breakpoint, we're going to get it scheduled. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah, it's been a blast. I've been doing it for about a year now, almost a year, and it's amazing. And then like a professional shill is like, I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Nick Frosty, Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. If anyone's interested in learning about the Solana ecosystem, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. It's both part of my job and I love doing it. So I'm more than happy to talk with anybody. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. appreciate you making yourself available. As we said at the top, we're all in this together and we're all going to make it together. So that
100%.
support is exactly what we need. Okay, quick speed round before we wrap here. What's an NFT you'll never sell, Nick?
Ooh. So I mentioned Drip House at the beginning, somewhere in the show a couple of times. So one of my favorite projects, you just mint a bunch of NFTs for free. And I've actually been like a Drip House receiver, I guess, since like their first drop. And one of my favorite ones is the NFT that I'll never sell. It's called Technicolor Reef. It's AI generated. It's a beautiful picture. It's actually made by someone who now works at the Solana Foundation. Kind of ironic. He didn't at the time though. Amazing artist. His name's Banana. This is the NFT I'll never sell. I love it. It's my favorite one. It is gorgeous, and it was generated with AI.
His name's Banana. I love it. Okay. One thing you've bought recently for under $100 that brings you joy.
I think I'll probably go with actually the camera I'm talking to you on. I have a couple of cold shoe mounts. Or no, sorry, not cold shoes. What are they called? I have like some hot plates, some Swiss plates that you can like easily swap out. So I have a couple of the adapters so I can easily move my camera between different tripods and things like that. Amazing. They're like $30 on Amazon, and they are a game changer.
You can tell that Nick's a content creator when he's
for
hardware. Okay, last question, Nick. If you had a billboard that 1 billion people were going to see, what would you write on it?
You guys sent me this, and I was thinking, I was like, I don't know what I would put on this billboard. And so I'm going to kind of steal one from the Solana Foundation. We have these billboards that do say only we have them right now in Amsterdam. We did them in Berlin. We had a Berlin hacker house go on a month ago, 2 months ago, and they were kind of scattered around. There's a bunch of posters and stuff too. I think one of those ones is probably what I would go with. The only possible on Solana, and it's like says like it has like cool logos, cool graphics, and just like a URL to go to. Because it's like, if you think about it, it's just enough interest of like, why is it only possible? Like it's just enough that you like might go look at the link. So I think it's actually a great billboard.
It's a great meme. It's an absolutely really good meme, no doubt.
Yeah. Awesome. Nick, thanks so much for the time. Deep bow to you and the whole team over at the Solana Foundation. Really appreciate all your effort and your contribution to the space.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been great. And look forward to connecting more.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening in, everybody. Have yourselves a great day.
Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy, your one trusted source to capitalize on the next big phase of the internet. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and subscribe or follow so that you don't miss the next one. While you're at it, there's a link in the description for our free newsletter where we provide timely and relevant Web3 insights so you can confidently build and invest in Web3. Make sure to subscribe today. One final note. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Crypto and Web3 are risky, and you should never invest more than you're willing to lose. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.